the most fascinating and influential warrior cultures you've probably never heard of, the Arians. And no, I'm not talking about anything related to 20th century pseudoscience. I'm talking about the real Arians, or more accurately, the Aryan people, a term that simply meant noble ones in ancient Indo-Iranian languages. These were the proto-Indo-European warriors who between 4000 and 1500 BCE fundamentally changed the face of warfare and civilization across an entire continent. They were, in many ways, the world's first knights, elite warrior horsemen who combined advanced technology, sophisticated tactics, and a rigid code of honor, centuries before the medieval period we usually associate with knighthood. To understand the Arians, we first need to establish who we're actually talking about. The term Aryan comes from the Sanskrit word Arya and the Old Persian Arya, both meaning noble or honorable. These people were part of the larger Indo-European migrations that swept across Eurasia during the Bronze Age. The archaeological culture most associated with early Aryan warriors is the Sintashta Petrovka culture, which flourished around 2100 to 1800 BCE in the steppes of modern-day Russia and Kazakhstan. This is where we find the earliest evidence of spoked-wheeled chariots, horse sacrifice, and fortified settlements that suggest a society organized around warfare and horse culture. Here's something unusual that most people don't know. The Sintashta settlements weren't just military camps. They were actually sophisticated circular or oval fortifications with precisely planned layouts. The settlement of Arkaim, discovered in 1987, has been called the Russian Gupta Stonehenge because of its circular design and astronomical alignments. The site shows evidence of advanced metallurgy, with workshops producing bronze weapons, and its layout suggests the inhabitants had deep knowledge of geometry and astronomy. These weren't simple nomads. They were a complex society that combined pastoral mobility with settled metalworking centers. They bred horses, developed new technologies, and created a warrior aristocracy that would influence cultures from India to Europe. The Aryans worshipped sky gods, practiced elaborate burial rituals involving chariots and horses, and maintained a three-tiered social structure: warriors at the top, priests who maintained sacred knowledge, and commoners who supported both. Sound familiar? This basic structure would reappear again and again in Indo-European societies, from Vedic India to medieval Europe. Now let's talk about what made the Aryans truly revolutionary: their relationship with horses. Horses had been domesticated on the Eurasian steppes around 4000 BCE, probably in the region of modern Kazakhstan. But the Aryans took horse culture to an entirely new level. Here's an unusual fact that blows my mind. The earliest evidence of horse bits, the metal mouthpieces that allow riders to control horses, comes from Sintashta sites around 2000 BCE. These weren't crude devices either. They were sophisticated cheek pieces made from bone or antler, designed to give riders precise control over their mounts. This technology was so advanced that similar designs wouldn't appear in other regions for centuries. But the Arians weren't just riders. They were horse breeders who understood genetics before the concept existed. Archaeological evidence shows they selectively bred horses for size, strength, and temperament. The horses buried in Sintashta graves were significantly larger than earlier domesticated horses, suggesting generations of careful breeding programs. These weren't the small pony-like horses of earlier periods. These were war horses, bred specifically for pulling chariots and eventually for mounted combat. The spiritual significance of horses in Aryan culture cannot be overstated. In Vedic tradition, which descended from Aryan culture, the horse sacrifice, or Ashvamedha, was the most prestigious ritual a king could perform. Horses were associated with the sun god, with sovereignty, and with the warrior's path to the afterlife. In burial mounds across the steppes we find horses interred alongside warriors, often in full harness, ready to carry their masters into the next world. Here's something that connects to our astronomical theme. Horses in Indo-European mythology are often associated with celestial phenomena. The Rig Veda describes the sun as a chariot pulled by 7 horses across the sky. The Greek god Helios drove his solar chariot from east to west each day. This wasn't just poetic fancy, it reflects a deep understanding that the movements of celestial bodies were regular, predictable, and could be tracked with the same precision that a charioteer controlled his team. The Arians developed an entire vocabulary around horses and horse equipment that spread with Indo-European languages. The word for horse in Sanskrit is ashva, in Latin equus, in Greek hippos, all descending from a common proto-Indo-European root. This linguistic evidence tells us that horse culture was absolutely central to Aryan identity and spread with them across Eurasia. This brings us to the heart of why the Arians can be called the first knights, the war chariot. The invention of the spoked wheel chariot around 2000 BCE was nothing short of a military revolution, comparable to the invention of tanks in World War I or nuclear weapons in the 20th century. Let's break down why this technology was so game-changing. Earlier vehicles used solid wheels, which were heavy and slow. The Sintashta people invented the spoked wheel, a dramatic weight reduction that allowed chariots to move at high speeds. Archaeological finds show these wheels had 8 to 112 spokes, made from carefully selected wood, and were precisely engineered for balance and durability. A full Sintashta chariot was a marvel of Bronze Age engineering. It required a lightweight frame made from bent wood, often birch, rawhide or leather panels for the sides, bronze fittings and nails, precisely balanced wheels, a yoke system to harness 2 horses, and bronze weapons including spears and eventually composite bows. Building one chariot required the coordinated effort of wheelwrights, woodworkers, leatherworkers, and bronze smiths. This was high technology that required significant resources and specialized knowledge. Here's where it gets interesting in terms of parallels with medieval knights. Chariot warfare created a warrior elite. Not everyone could afford a chariot and the team of horses to pull it. Not everyone had the skill to drive one in battle while wielding weapons. Chariot warriors became an aristocratic class, just as knights would later. They trained from youth, they had codes of conduct, and they were celebrated in poetry and song. The tactics of chariot warfare were sophisticated. Chariots weren't just ramming devices, they were mobile archery platforms. A team of 2 would work together, one driving, one shooting. They could harass enemy infantry from a distance, break up formations, and retreat before being caught. The psychological impact was enormous. Imagine being a Bronze Age foot soldier and seeing a line of chariots bearing down on you at 20 miles per hour, dust clouds rising, the thunder of hooves, warriors shooting arrows from moving platforms. It would be terrifying. But here's an unusual detail most people don't know. The Arians weren't just warriors, they were also sportsmen. Archaeological evidence suggests they held chariot races and competitive games, much like the later Greeks and Romans. The Rig Veda contains numerous references to chariot races as both sporting events and religious rituals. The warrior aristocracy honed their skills through competition, maintaining their edge even during peacetime. The parallel to medieval knighthood becomes even clearer when we look at the social structure. Chariot warriors were maintained by the broader society. They didn't farm, they trained for war. They were granted land or tribute in exchange for military service. They formed bonds of loyalty with their lords and with each other. They had elaborate initiation rituals marking the transition from youth to warrior status. This is essentially the feudal system, appearing 3,000 years before medieval Europe. Now let's talk about something that might seem unexpected: the Aryans' sophisticated understanding of astronomy. This knowledge was crucial to their success as both warriors and migrants across vast distances. For anyone interested in diving deeper into ancient astronomical knowledge, I'd highly recommend checking out The History and Practice of Ancient Astronomy by James Evans. It's an incredible resource that shows how ancient peoples tracked celestial movements with remarkable precision, and it provides great context for understanding how cultures like the Aryans navigated their world. The Aryans were master navigators who travelled thousands of miles across the Eurasian steppes. How did they do this without maps or compasses? They read the stars. The night sky was their GPS, and they developed sophisticated methods of celestial navigation that would be passed down through their descendant cultures. Here's something fascinating. The oldest parts of the Rig Veda, which preserves Aryan religious texts, contain remarkably accurate descriptions of celestial phenomena. They identified the 27 or 28 lunar mansions, the constellations through which the moon passes during its monthly cycle. They tracked the movements of planets, which they called grahas or Caesars. They recognized the precession of the equinoxes, the slow wobble of Earth's axis that changes which star sits at the celestial North Pole over thousands of years. The layout of Sintashta settlements like Archaeum shows clear astronomical alignments. The site is oriented to cardinal directions with remarkable precision. Certain structures align with the summer and winter solstices. This wasn't superstition. This was practical knowledge. Understanding the solar year was crucial for pastoral societies who needed to track seasons for breeding animals and finding pasture. The solstices marked turning points in the year, and the Aryans built their most important settlements to reflect these cosmic cycles. But here's where it gets really interesting from a military perspective. The Aryans used astronomical knowledge for warfare. Ancient texts describe how commanders would time military campaigns according to the positions of planets and stars. This wasn't just astrology, it was practical timekeeping. Before written calendars, the positions of celestial bodies told you the time of year, helped coordinate movements across vast distances, and allowed armies to rendezvous at specific times and places. There's another book worth mentioning here, Astronomy Before the Telescope, edited by Christopher Walker, contains excellent chapters on Bronze Age astronomy and shows how ancient peoples achieved remarkable precision in their observations using nothing but careful measurement and long-term record-keeping. The Aryans' astronomical knowledge was preserved and expanded by their descendant cultures. In India, it developed into sophisticated mathematical astronomy. In ancient Persia, it influenced the development of the zodiac. In Europe, it contributed to Greek and Roman astronomical traditions. The warrior culture of the steppes carried with it a scientific legacy that would shape human understanding of the cosmos. Here's an unusual connection. The same precision and discipline required for celestial observation was applied to chariot warfare. Both required patient observation, careful measurement, predictive thinking, and the ability to coordinate complex movements. A good chariot warrior needed to calculate trajectories, judge distances, and coordinate with teammates. Skills that parallel astronomical observation. So what happened to these first knights of the ancient world? They didn't disappear, they transformed and spread. Between 2000 and 1500 BCE, waves of Aryan migrations spread across Eurasia. One branch moved south through Central Asia, eventually entering the Indian subcontinent around 1500 BCE. These Indo-Aryans brought their language, which evolved into Sanskrit, their chariot warfare, their tripartite social structure, and their religious practices, which were developed into Vedic Hinduism. Another branch moved west and south, becoming the Iranians of ancient Persia and Media, the Persian Empire's famous cavalry. The elite warriors who nearly conquered Greece were direct descendants of the Aryan chariot tradition. When the Persians transitioned from chariots to mounted cavalry around 1000 BCE, they maintained the same warrior aristocracy, the same codes of honor, and the same prestigious status. Westward migrations influenced the peoples of Eastern Europe and the steppes. The Scythians, Sarmatians, and eventually the Alans were all heirs to the Aryan warrior tradition. They too were horse warriors, elite mounted archers, organized into aristocratic war bands. But here's the really unusual part that most historians don't emphasize. The Aryan model of warrior aristocracy influenced the development of knighthood in medieval Europe through multiple pathways. Germanic tribes who swept into the Roman Empire had warrior elites who were partly influenced by Eastern steppe traditions through centuries of contact. The stirrup, which revolutionized medieval cavalry, was invented on the Central Asian steppes by peoples who were cultural descendants of the Arians. The very concept of a mounted warrior aristocracy, maintained by agricultural laborers, the core of feudalism, echoes the social structure of Bronze Age steppe societies. Even more fascinating, the code of chivalry that defined medieval knighthood has parallels in ancient Aryan texts. The Rig Veda praises truthfulness, courage in battle, generosity to retainers, and protection of dependents, the same virtues celebrated in medieval chivalric literature. The idea that elite warriors should follow a code of conduct that goes beyond mere military efficiency appears to be very old indeed, stretching back to the Bronze Age steppes. The linguistic legacy is undeniable. Indo-European languages spread with Aryan migrations, carrying words related to warfare, horses, social hierarchy, and astronomy across the continent. When medieval knights spoke of their equestrian skills, they were using a word descended from the same root as Sanskrit ashva. When they swore oaths by the heavens, they were echoing rituals that stretched back to the Sintashta culture. So why don't we hear more about the Arians? Partly because the term was poisoned by 20th century misuse and pseudoscience, but also because their story doesn't fit neatly into our usual historical narratives. They weren't a civilization in the way we typically understand it. They didn't build pyramids or write on clay tablets. They were mobile, adaptive, and spread across such vast territories that their influence is often invisible in the archaeological record. But when we look carefully, we can see their legacy everywhere, in the languages spoken from Iceland to India, in the warrior aristocracies that dominated Eurasia for millennia, in the horse cultures that persisted on the steppes until modern times, and yes, in the knights of medieval Europe who thought they were creating something new, but were actually inheriting a tradition thousands of years old. The Arians were the first people to fully weaponize the horse, the first to create a mobile warrior aristocracy, the first to combine sophisticated technology with elite military training to dominate vast territories. They were astronomers and engineers, poets and warriors. They tracked the stars while conquering kingdoms. They built circular cities aligned with the cosmos while breeding war horses in their corrals. They deserve to be remembered not as a footnote or a controversial term, but as one of the most influential warrior cultures in human history, the first knights of the ancient world. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into ancient history, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more unusual facts about ancient and medieval warfare. Drop a comment below. Did you know about the Arians before this video? What other ancient warrior cultures should we cover? For those wanting to explore ancient astronomy further, check out the books I mentioned in the description below, and remember, history isn't just about dates and battles. It's about understanding how ancient innovations echo through time, shaping the world we live in today. See you in the next video.